Excellent. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for Macquarie University Postgraduate Exploration Month. You're here today for the Master of Cybersecurity Analysis. Thank you so much for joining us with our live webinar. My name is Monica. I'm a student ambassador and a current student at Macquarie University. I'm studying a Bachelor of Laws with a Bachelor of Social Science majoring in criminology. So it's my absolute pleasure to be moderating today's session and to introduce to you our very special guests. So with us today, we have Dr. Stephen McCombie, who's the course director for the Master of Cybersecurity Analysis, and Aaron Herbst, who's a current PhD student and a former master's student who has worked in a range of cybersecurity roles that are combating digital piracy. So today's session will be about the Master of Cybersecurity Analysis, and it will showcase analytical careers within the cybersecurity field. You'll hear about the course and the experiences of a graduate firsthand from Aaron as he pursues his aspirations in cybersecurity. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. We pay our respects to them and their culture and elders past, present, and future. So I'll now introduce Dr. Stephen McCombie, course director for the Master of Cybersecurity Analysis, to provide a quick overview of the course. We'll then welcome our master's alumni and current PhD student, Aaron, who will share his own personal journeys and experiences. We'll also have the chance to answer your questions towards the end of this seminar. So before we start, I'll go through a little bit of housekeeping for us all. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation or during today's session, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer as many as we can either live towards the end of the webinar or in the Q&A box during the webinar itself. The session is being recorded, so if you miss out on anything or you just like to watch it back because you enjoyed it so much, then we'll be sharing it with you after the event. If we do run out of time, don't worry, you will still have the opportunity to book a one-on-one consultation that's personalized to you and all your queries to talk through any of your questions. And I'll have some information about how to do that and how to arrange one at the very end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'd love to hand over to you, Stephen, so you can give us a nice introduction into the Master of Cybersecurity Analysis.
Thanks, Monica. Yeah, welcome everybody. I'd want to talk about the Master of Cybersecurity Analysis, a bit about the industry, and also we're obviously talking to Aaron about his experiences. But just a bit about my background, give you a bit of an understanding of the way in which the backgrounds of many of the people in the Department of Security Studies and Criminology. A lot of us are practitioners, academics and practitioners, sort of quite broad experience. I think that's something that is unusual in universities to have that practical knowledge combined with the academic knowledge. But I think it's really important in this area. And I myself have been working in cybersecurity for almost 25 years. I know that there wasn't a lot of cybersecurity going on 25 years ago, but I was involved in law enforcement at the time. We're actually doing investigations into computer crime, very early computer crime. And I've worked right across the gambit. I've worked, as I said, in law enforcement. I've been an academic and been doing research. I've been a consultant, worked in industry, worked for big corporates. Obviously, like many people, I had a long journey in terms of my education. I decided at probably a late point in terms of my career to actually go back and study a computer science PhD and particularly look at cybercrime in a bit more detail. And my actual thesis actually looked at Russian and Ukrainian cybercrime groups that actually target Australian banks. So that was a really interesting topic, and it really was part of my thinking around understanding threats. Means you need to understand how they manifest and the people behind them. It's not just about the technical pieces. Obviously, along the way, I did a lot of technical work. And I think it's really interesting in terms of cybersecurity. People often ask about, is it a technical thing? Is it not a technical thing? In the end, it's a mix. I think Aaron's a great example of that mix. I'm also a bit of a mix of skills. So that's about me. Now, just a bit about the industry itself. There's a massive cybersecurity skills shortfall. Any of you that look at any of the job boards or look on LinkedIn, there's always cybersecurity roles being advertised. Often they're not filled. So there's actually great opportunities for graduates in cybersecurity. AusCyber, which is actually a government organisation which promotes the cybersecurity industry on behalf of government because of this shortage, actually identified that even by 2026, with the current numbers of students coming out, there's going to be 17,000 more cybersecurity workers needed. So even the current courses aren't producing enough for the medium-term shortfall. So there's lots of opportunities. I mean, obviously there's lots of different skills and roles required in cybersecurity. Then all jobs aren't all the same. People often say to me, "Oh, do I need to be able to program? I'm not going to be running a firewall." Now, there are jobs like that, but that's only a very small portion of the jobs. And if you're interested in cybersecurity as a profession and the breadth of it, there's a fantastic document, kind of detailed, but fantastic all the same, produced by an organisation called NIST, which is the US National Institute of Standards and Technology. That's a US government organisation that does a lot of good work in cybersecurity. And they looked across what are the different workplace categories, the jobs in cybersecurity are going to involve. And this slide here shows there's many different large categories. There's provisioning systems, setting them up. There's operating and maintaining systems. And then there's the less strictly technical roles, overseeing, governing that activity, protecting and defending. And this is sort of more in line with the sort of stuff we often talk about analysing attacks, understanding the potential for vulnerability, reviewing incoming information. So cybersecurity now has so much information coming in, and the demands on cyber intelligence teams and on analysts is huge. There's so much information needs to be absorbed and actually understood and communicated to decision makers, actually operate and collect information in investigations and actually investigate breaches. So there's a whole range of roles in that. And if you look at the NICE document, it actually describes, I think about 50 separate different roles in cybersecurity that are different and talks about the sort of skill sets there. So it's a great example of, what's really needed. So in terms of, what we try and focus on, what we really think about is the fact that the cyber domain has really reshaped the practice of intelligence. And we're very lucky in our department where we actually also teach intelligence. We have intelligence professionals. So we really come together. And intelligence in all its manifestations, collection, analysis, retention, dissemination, and counterintelligence is all impacted by the cyber domain. And likewise, intelligence methodologies can be used in tactical, operational, strategic cybersecurity. Those methodologies help us understand what the threats are, what the likely courses of action of a cyber adversary are, and how to actually defend against that. That's the only possible way to defend. And in best practice, we need both domains seamlessly integrated. It's really important, and there's plenty of examples. In recent times, 2016 US election was an intelligence failure, was a strategic surprise by the Russian military intelligence, a cyber attack to influence the election, and that seamless integration needs to happen. And that's what we're trying to help with, bring together the technical knowledge, the understanding of intelligence, the understanding of threats and threat actors in our course. So that's sort of at a high level what we're really interested in doing. Obviously, we have a number of different courses the department offer. We have a bachelor's degree. We have PhD courses, which I'm hoping to get Aaron into ours soon. He's currently at La Trobe. We also have a Master of Research, which is a pathway to a PhD. But today we're going to be talking about our master's degrees. Now, other than the Master of Cybersecurity Analysis, we also have degrees in Strategy and Security, Strategic Studies, in Intelligence, as I talked about, in Criminology, and also in Counterterrorism. So across the different degrees, this is sort of the coursework involved in the various parts of it. So basically there are common topics, things like critical thinking and research design, which is really a research subject talking about models of critical thinking, which really help you across all the different domains. But then more specific ones around cybersecurity activities, things like cybercrime and cyber policing, which essentially we look at the types of activities that typical criminals do, whether it's cyber fraud or doing ransomware or people using technology to harass someone, and a whole range of other things. Then we have another unit called cyber conflict, cyber espionage, and cyber terrorism. And that's essentially about the activities in the cyber domain by nation states, whether they be intelligence agencies or military organisations, politically motivated attackers, and terrorists. So we have the two different areas of looking at the cyber sphere that we do in those two different units. Then we have a unit called Applied Cybersecurity, which is essentially around good cybersecurity practice, and it's modelled on the CISSP, which you may have heard of, which is probably the best and best regarded cybersecurity certification. It's built around those domains, so teaching you all those different elements of good cybersecurity management practice. And then we have a unit around cyber intelligence, where we actually look at using intelligence directly in cyber and understanding the intelligence world in that sense. There are other electives then in terms of you can do a simulation where it's a large exercise. There's research units you can do, and other electives are available as well. So you can see there's a range of different subjects within the Master of Cybersecurity Analysis to actually help you build that comprehensive knowledge to prepare you for jobs in cybersecurity. But obviously we have other master degrees that are as listed here, and we do have flexibility around double degrees, and we actually have a number of different double degrees that are offered. We have, and the one which we promote most is the Master of Intelligence, Master of Cybersecurity Analysis, and that way you do those master's units in intelligence in addition to our cybersecurity units, and that talks about intelligence community in Australia, intelligence analysis, the history of intelligence, intelligence theory and policy. So it's a really good combination of cyber and the intelligence aspects. But that's not all. There's also a Master of Cybersecurity and Master of Criminology, which of course is really important. I mean, obviously there's a lot of work done on that crime side, and again, that's a great combination. And if we look back at the Master of Criminology, they talk about applied criminology, Australia's approach to law enforcement, and other really relevant subjects that are relevant in the cyberspace as well. So I won't go through all those because there's a lot of detail there, but you can see there's a lot of opportunity to do various other master's degrees. You may be interested in counter-terrorism, and there's the opportunity there to combine that with the cybersecurity, but also strategic studies if you're interested in giving high-level advice to government, thinking about those big strategic issues for nations. Then that's a great combination too, because cyber is part of all these things now. So that's probably all I was going to say on that. So I'll just go back to you, Monica.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen. It was great to have that insight into how some of those different master's programs do differ. I do know that, Aaron, you studied an earlier version of this course where it was actually intelligence and counterterrorism combined. So it's interesting to see that, as you said, Stephen, the industry is definitely exploding and has this great need for professionals in the cybersecurity field. So it's definitely an area of particular interest for anyone who wants to make themselves very, very employable with the degrees that Macquarie has to offer. So thank you for that insight. So Aaron, let's focus on you now. So I would love if you could share with us a little bit more information about yourself and your background.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Monica. So my name's Aaron Herbst. My background is fairly broad. I started out in purely technical engineering. So I did a 2-year traineeship or 3-year traineeship with Singtel Optus, looking at network engineering. And I then spent another 4 years there doing management and operation and maintenance of the 2G, 3G, and eventually the rollout of the 4G network. While I was there, I was involved in working with the law enforcement liaison unit, just by virtue of the department I happened to be in. And in that role, I was doing a lot of work on extracting information from the network, which would otherwise not be available for law enforcement. And from there, I kind of fell into a role doing anti-piracy, which at first seems kind of counterintuitive that there's not a lot of relationship there. but the skills that I'd learnt doing engineering and that technical side really applied themselves to looking at and interrogating the internet more broadly. And it was at that point that I decided to do a computer science degree in network and internet. So while I was working full-time with the Motion Picture Association of America and their Australian arm, I started doing my computer science degree. And while there, I realised that it was more than just intelligence on the internet that I was looking at. It was working with enforcement bodies such as the Federal Police and New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland Police. But I also started doing a lot of work within the Asia Pacific region and travelling a little bit there and sort of explaining to different organisations and police units around the region about how we can actually extract intelligence off the internet. And while we were doing that, my role was obviously fairly cross-functional by this point in intelligence and training and enforcement. We're also doing a number of court cases. One of them in particular was quite a large one in Australia, where our organisation sued an ISP on behalf of a number of rights owners. And we needed to really ask the question of essentially how much infringement was actually going on. And so we started working with research institutions, a few different universities to answer those questions. And I got put in charge of managing that research. And that's when I really started getting interested in the research aspect of what we were doing. And so that's when I undertook the MPICT, or Policing, Intelligence and Counterterrorism, because I really wanted to ask those questions, why things are the way they are, rather than just knowing how to do something. And I found that critical thinking component that Stephen was talking about, which is the base unit for essentially all the master's degrees that came up there, was really, really important. To sort of ask those get more behind the inquiry about how the policy relates to intelligence and enforcement and how it feeds back in to decision makers and policy makers and basically the outcomes of what they're trying to achieve. So I've been basically doing anti-piracy work in the cybersecurity domain for the better part of 14 years now, with multiple different agencies. My previous one was with BN Sports, part of the BN Group, based out of Qatar, where more recently we were dealing with nation-state-backed piracy from a large Middle Eastern country and dealing with during the World Cup. So I was over in the Middle East dealing with that in real time, which was a really fascinating kind of experience where you're dealing with looking at how a signal's being hacked, how it's being broadcast again over the internet, and to try and work out ways to stop it in real time, detect where the signals are coming from, and shut down that network, but also at the same time trying to understand the reasoning behind why a nation state would want to do that and what political pressure could be applied in different ways. So it was really a cross-functional kind of role. And a lot of that was gained from doing this policing, intelligence and counterterrorism masters, where we're really looking at those differing factors at that fundamental level and the why level. And so we could answer those questions. And so I've been able to apply a lot of that into my work since then. So that probably wraps up quite a lengthy overview of my career. So I'll pass back to you, Monica.
Well, I suppose with a career that's spanned at least 14 years across so many different agencies, it's great to know just how many different areas there are, Aaron, and how your studies at Macquarie have really helped you with answering, as you said, the why questions as well as the how questions. So thank you so much for that background on yourself. So in particular, what do you think it is about Macquarie that was different for you, and why in particular did you choose Macquarie to study with?
I think really it was the breadth of the course that was offered, the fact that it combined a lot of what I found useful in terms of the policing, intelligence and counterterrorism. So I'd actually been recommended the course. I actually knew Stephen prior to taking the course and a number of other people who I'd worked with in the past who had either worked here or done the course, and they actually recommended doing it. So that was obviously fed into that decision, but it was really just the breadth of the course and being able to apply the different areas of that to my existing work was really the key factors that made that decision. I think that's probably the main reason, Monica.
Absolutely, fair enough. And of course, getting the perspective of someone who studied it is super, super handy, as I'm sure our guests today will appreciate. So how has the Master of Cybersecurity Analysis changed your perspective on the industry and also in particular the future of cybersecurity? I know you've touched on this a little bit already, but perhaps if you could tell us specifically about areas of growth that you've noticed, or how these big changes have really impacted how you've approached some of these growing issues in the field.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, I think how it's helped me in particular in terms of understanding why, for example, enforcement the way it operates the way it does, things like situational crime prevention and that kind of understanding of broken window kind of theory of policing, understanding the theory that underpins that kind of the way that when we're dealing with enforcement, how they approach a situation is really critical, because then it feeds back into your, depending on your job role. If you're collecting intelligence, you're trying to grab the intelligence which is applicable to the policing and the enforcement are going to want to use. So you've got this kind of understanding of the theory that underpinning what they're trying to achieve, not necessarily in crime prevention, but you're understanding why they're approaching a task the way they are. Particularly, I'm finding more and more it's the policy that I'm dealing with a lot more of, and how the policy interacts with policing and intelligence in particular. So essentially, when I'm looking at something, why a policy is like it is and why the enforcement's applied, how do we get the feedback from that and put it back into policymakers and decision makers and say, well, look, this is no longer working and we need to change that. So then when you're going back into this intelligence kind of position and grabbing the intelligence to show that the enforcement or that situation's not working. In terms of what I'm doing, a lot of the stuff is around internet governance. I've just spent a lot of time doing that, looking at policies about why the internet is so dysfunctional in terms of cybersecurity and applying legislation globally. And sure, we have like the European Convention of Cybercrime and all these kind of things, but the definition of cybercrime, for example, is still not settled. I mean, we've got so many different ways that we talk about it, and how Europe talks about it to how Australia talks about it, and that feeds into the way that the legislation's created and how it's applied. And so I find that all really fascinating. I think that my understanding is really driven from the fact that I've spent time looking in the weeds, I guess, and understanding that that research and the critical thinking that I sort of developed at Macquarie. I don't think I probably would be at the same position I am now had it not been for that. In terms of where I think it's going, look, I think anyone can be taught how to do a forensic course. Anyone can be taught how to use FTK or Encase, but it's really understanding why things work the way they do. And I think being adaptable to the situation. I mean, cybersecurity, without doubt, is the fastest changing field there is. And for whatever reason, it's still growing at an exponential rate, whether that be because we've got bad laws or we've got good laws, but they're just not applied properly. These are all questions that we really need to answer and get on top of. But at the end of the day, the situation is that cybercrime is still massively growing, and we need more people really to be on top of it and actually understanding what's going on. And it's more than just knowing how to look at a bit of intelligence or do a bit of enforcement. It's about applying those logics in different ways and asking yourself, is this the best way of doing something? Can it be done better? And if not, why not? And I think they're really critical questions. And I think that's what the Masters, at least what I took away from it, was really good at sort of pushing that knowledge towards, was good at pushing it onto me, was basically understanding that, you know, you can ask those questions and you can kind of extract that information from different things, but you've got to know where to look and the right questions to ask in the first place.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that detailed insight into the future, really, of the industry. Going now to your personal experiences more as a student or starting off into this master's, did you have any particular fears or challenges or concerns about the course or when starting the course, and how do you think those were addressed as you began studying at Macquarie?
Yeah, look, I think my biggest concern was I hadn't done any actual formal education in 6 years before starting the Masters. So it was, how am I going to manage full-time, 2 young children and do a Masters at the same time? So one of the things I guess that sort of helped was the fact that I was able to do it completely online. I didn't have to go into a university, and it was at my own pace and own time, essentially within the remit of the time frame of the course. But it allowed me to space things out and do things in the evenings and work like that. I guess to some extent, I was worried about how technical it would be, not because I don't think I couldn't code, but I guess to some extent I didn't want it to be too technical. I wanted that more in-depth analysis of something. And I think when I got started, I realised straight away that it wasn't getting into that technical analysis of something. It was really more research-based and having the opportunity to explore different fields and topics in a little bit more depth, but how they apply to technology, but not at that technical level, if that makes sense. In terms of challenges, I think communicating with people in a meaningful way, I guess, was one of the other issues that I think that I felt I was going to be fronted with, but I found that the online engagement was really, really fascinating. I mean, as well as being part of the course requirements actually to be engaged, people genuinely got into really in-depth discussions about things. And I remember in particular when I was doing the policing unit, the lecturer at the time had put up a list of cyber crimes and, you know, having a background in anti-piracy. One of the last comments that was left was, and piracy is not really a crime. And that just sort of opened the gate for me to kind of have this really robust discussion with not only the lecturer, but the other students, and allow me to put forward my opinion in obviously a meaningful way and respectful way. But it did have this really, really good engagement with a lot of people, and to be able to discuss these issues and issues that are still being discussed at a much larger policy level globally about what actually defines cybercrime. And it was good to be able to take those discussions at a more micro level and discuss them with the other students to sort of get their views, because there was a broad range of students who were doing the course. It wasn't just people who were from my field, obviously. We had a lot of people from policing or banking, and people who didn't have a background in a work background. They were doing straight out of their bachelor. So we had this really great cross mix of people, and we're able to sort of share our experiences and knowledge and sort of look at them from different perspectives, which I found fascinating.
Yes, thank you for that, Aaron. It's definitely interesting. I know for myself, I've had a taste of what it's like to have postgraduate studies in cybersecurity. Through my criminology degree, I've been able to take some units, and it's definitely a fantastic opportunity to be able to engage with your peers and have those discussions about more of the theoretical issues as opposed to just the technical side. And of course, in an industry where those technical skills are always changing, it's great to have that theoretical knowledge. Coming from more of a technical side with your earlier studies in IT and computing for your bachelor's degree, do you think that it really has been beneficial to have both sides to the industry as part of your studies? Would you recommend someone who has more of a technical IT background to definitely consider cyber security going forward for its more theoretical advantages?
100%. The one thing that I find lacking in the cybersecurity domain is people who can actually explain extremely technical concepts to non-technical people. It's one of the biggest issues we face in terms of policy development, in terms of legislative writing, and the way that it's enforced. One of the things in my PhD topic is around website blocking and how that's applied in different countries, and really sitting down with policymakers and actually explaining how the process works how it's applied in different countries at different levels, the technical details behind it, and being able to simplify that process down to them and tell them what's possible and what's not is fundamental to what I do. But when I go around and speak to these areas, to these governments and other decision makers, you find that they don't understand it at all. They haven't been explained in a way that's meaningful. So I would absolutely say that if you've got the technical knowledge and the desire to, I guess, be willing to look at the cybersecurity domain more broadly, I think it's absolutely something you should do, because it's going to help no end. Because the experience I've had since then, since I've done the course, like I said, I mean, I've travelled to multiple places with different companies to do this kind of work. And obviously it's not just isolated to my field of cybersecurity, my domain. But without doubt, having this broader understanding of the bigger picture, I think is critical.
Thank you so much, Aaron. That definitely gives a lot of insight into how a lot of our interpersonal skills are still very, very relevant in the IT space. And so it's important to further our studies with that sort of support that cybersecurity enables, and that higher order thinking, but also simplification of such technical information. That's fantastic. So now we'll go into our Q&A. We'll answer some of our questions. So thank you so much to those of you who have sent some through. Please feel free to continue sending some through so we can have them answered by Aaron and Stephen about everything to do with the course. So we'll start off with a question from Jason. Thank you, Jason. He asks, can I ask about two areas? Firstly, developing software and systems for cybersecurity, and secondly, auditing for cybersecurity ISO 27001 and CISO or CISM accreditation. I'm sure I've butchered some of those, but Stephen, if you're happy to answer first, and Aaron, if you have anything to add, that'd be fantastic as well.
I mean, developing security software obviously is a niche area. It's not something we address directly. Obviously, we talk about that sort of thing. They do that, in our department of computing. They definitely look at programming, that sort of thing. I mean, it's a growing area, obviously, because there's lots of opportunities in that space. But it's probably, if you look at that nice document I showed, it is just one part of one of those areas what you're talking about. And obviously, historically, doing that sort of work probably was a big part of cybersecurity, but now, as I say, it's a very niche area. Nothing wrong with it. It's a really good area to work in if that's your desire. In terms of certifications, audit was the second part. So obviously audit things. I think you can certainly benefit from our course in terms of if you want to go into some sort of IT audit role, and having that really broad understanding of the threats and how things hang together is key in doing those IT audits. The challenge for an IT auditor is you're brought in, you're looking at new systems with new applications for different purposes, with different technology, in different environments with different threats. So you have to have a very broad understanding of the threats and how things hang together. Much more, I suppose, the sort of things we would address than if you're doing a strictly technical degree. So the third part, the CISSP, which is a fantastic certification. I have it myself. It's the best regarded, as I said in the introduction, best regarded certification in security. There's also CISM, which is actually done by the IT auditors. I'd say it's second. It's still well regarded, but it's probably second to CISSP. But I think the benefit of CISSP is it gives you knowledge across the 10 domains of cybersecurity, right from technical things around intrusion detection and firewalls, right through to physical security and policy and forensics and all sorts of things. So it's very broad. So it gives an employer the comfort that you have a comprehensive understanding of what cybersecurity is from end to end, not just a little niche and not understanding other parts. And as Aaron was saying, one of the great challenges is that people are trying to explain in all sorts of situations some technical issue that's a cybersecurity issue to a decision maker, and because of their lack of knowledge of the the diversity of IT and of the challenges, they really can't communicate it effectively. They only understand their little area. And it's really important having that broad knowledge that CISSP gives you in terms of understanding the breadth of cybersecurity, not just the little piece you work in.
And if I could just add on the software design part, having worked in a particular field for a while, I find that if you get someone who's just around the software design, who doesn't understand the day-to-day issues of the particular problem, you end up with a generic piece of software which doesn't necessarily meet your requirements. And so I think unless you've got that experience within that field at that really down to the nitty-gritty level, you can struggle to produce a bit of software that actually meets the requirements that are needed. And there's a lot of software out there that does a lot of different things, but you really want to have that understanding, that base level of what's going on and what's needed at that day-to-day running level. So by all means, you do the software design for it, but you need to have that really good understanding of what you're trying to get out of it.
And cybersecurity tools are really important, but in the end, they're just tools. It's about, and that's what, it's a profession, cybersecurity. It's about having professional people, using the right tools for the right tasks. The tools themselves don't solve the problem. I've been a technologist, and technologists tend to want to find a technical solution, but the reality is cybersecurity, it's a much more nuanced solution than that. You need to use a range of different activities to actually solve the problem. Tools are important, but they're not everything.
Absolutely. So that definitely highlights why it's so important to have a degree or to have this master's course that really goes into the theory and how to weave together those different levels of security tools. And a great question to follow up with here from Mendy is, what if we don't have a technical background at all? Can we still do this degree and go into this industry? If we just do something like policy analysis and so forth, was that helpful?
Yeah, no, I don't. I suppose the thing is, I think you can have an interesting technical things. You don't have to have a technical background. That's how I'd say. If you've got no desire to know anything about computers, it's probably not the job for you. But clearly, and working in cybersecurity, there's a lot of people that aren't from strictly technical backgrounds. In fact, in IT, the thing that surprised me in my first proper IT job for a bank was how few people working in IT are actually technical necessarily. You just assume everyone in IT is going to be a programmer, extraordinaire, someone who's done a computer science course. That's just not the case, because there's a range of roles. And the same in cybersecurity. So I wouldn't say no, you have to have a technical background. Obviously, that technical knowledge, building that technical knowledge is a benefit, but it's more about being able to understand some basic concepts. I mean, IT and computing and cybersecurity is about understanding some basic concepts and to build on those. You're never going to know the nitty gritty. No one does. Even the experts only know their bit of nitty gritty. And that's the reality. So, and I think it's really beneficial. We've got a master's intern working with us at the moment in our cyber intelligence lab, and she's actually from a marketing background, and she's been fantastic because she understands great ways of communicating with people. We've helped her understand what the big issues are and what we think, and she's put her in a way that we can actually talk to businesses, talk to the public about these issues. So there's a range of different soft skills that were really beneficial in cybersecurity.
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much. It really shows how the master's program can kind of fill the gaps if you feel that there may be some. So Ali has asked a wonderful question that is very relevant to our current climate. They ask, how do you think the graduate market will fare during COVID-19? Do you think that there will be more of a surge compared to the 2019 statistic that Stephen displayed earlier for cybersecurity with the rise of cybercrime during COVID-19? And perhaps if either of you have any insights into what kinds of cybercrime we're seeing emerging and any sorts of concerns related to those, that would be fantastic as well.
Sure. I don't think COVID-19 is going to impact that surge in opportunities in cybersecurity. If anything, increase them. I mean, the reality is we're more reliant on technology, remote technology than ever before. I know many people that would never have done a Zoom call in their lives, but now are doing it all the time. The attack footprint is massive in terms of people, criminals, intelligence agencies, whoever it is, who want to do these things. so the threat's grown significantly. It's interesting that there's still plenty of jobs, even though that relatively the job market's probably quiet across the board. But in cybersecurity, it's not. There's still lots of opportunities out there. I think that not only the government but industries are seen as a priority area. It's a key risk. If you ever look at these lists of key risks, it's often number one in organisations. It's definitely number one in terms of national security threats in this country and in other Western countries. So I don't think, if anything, it's increases it, because our reliance on technology is becoming all that more fundamental, and the opportunities for the attackers are so much greater in this environment.
And if I could just add to that, I know particularly in my domain, the amount of jobs that have come up which are now allowed for the remote workforce, as opposed to requiring you to be physically located in a particular country or place, have grown significantly in the last 6 months, which is something that I never thought I'd see in that way. I mean, usually my role was focused in a Singapore, US or European role, whereas now it's very remote. Very remote workforce, and that's not really an issue. Just touching on your point too about people using Zoom calls and things like that, the amount of Zoom calls I've had with Southeast Asian governments, which I never thought I would have, given that they're reluctant to either learn the technology or use it. However, but in the last 3 months in particular has just been amazing. The amount of times we've jumped on calls with government and regulatory bodies, which has never happened before, reducing the need to actually travel, which is just a fundamental shift in the industry in such a very short time.
And one thing about the industry, which obviously COVID's not necessarily relevant, but is the fact that it's a global industry, and certainly my consulting experience, I could consult in South Korea or in China or in Germany or in America, and I did, on some of the very same issues. So it's very global, and the fact that we are much more open to telecommuting, the opportunities, for someone living in Australia is to work in all those places and support, do cybersecurity consulting or work in other countries. But being based in Australia, I think the opportunities are massive, because it's not like being a lawyer or things that are much more based on where you're at. The lessons learned anywhere are applicable everywhere. So that's the great thing as a career for cybersecurity. You can go and work for an organisation, in Eastern Europe or in South America or anywhere, and those skills are going to equip you for all those places.
Absolutely. It's great to know that it's a course that has so many skills that are applicable globally. Becoming such a global workforce is so relevant, especially now as we are working more digitally across the globe. So there's definitely a lot of interest there. Thank you so much for that answer. So we also have a question from an anonymous attendee, and they are mentioning cyber attacks that are linked to some countries that are a hot topic. Do you see whether this might be a trend that continues, or how do you see there being an opportunity on anti-cyber attack professionals to work in that particular field? Aaron, this might be also very relevant to your studies and your interests. I'm anti-cyber. I look at what I do now as looking at both sides. We're looking at the enforcement side, and we look at preventative side. It's two sides of the same equation, essentially. We want to minimise the attack surface, and we want to penalise those who are actually attacking. I think there is more incentive in governments at the moment to look at how they can minimise the attack happening from outside their own borders. So, I'm not sure about across all domains, but certainly within what I'm doing, a lot more governments are interested in looking at how they can prevent their citizens from being exposed to one thing or another. So from the preventative side, there is a lot more interest in governments, generally speaking. How that applies to enforcement means that they have to switch the way that they're looking at things, because they're not looking at someone internally, they're looking at something that's happening extraterritorial or extrajudicial. So it's a very different way of approaching a problem. I'm not sure if I can answer that any better, Stephen. Have you got any other thoughts?
Well, I just want to say that absolutely nation states are using cyber, as never before. And it's probably been going on for at least 10 years, maybe 15 years, a lot of countries have been using cyber as an attack vector. The problem is, just to sort of talk as an academic for a second, is the fact that there's very little ways of discouraging that. It's much easier to use cyber than it is to use military force or spies on the ground or whatever. So it's actually a low risk option for a nation state. Plus, no one's actually said we shouldn't be using these weapons against each other. In fact, we're all doing it. Australia's doing it, the US is doing it, China's doing it, Russia's doing it. Like, every country you can think of, Singapore's doing it. Everyone's doing it. It's effective, it's cheap. It gets them a really good payback for their investment compared to normal weapons.
Can't be attributed.
It's deniability. It's fantastic. And the problem is that everyone sees the advantage in it, but again, we're all victims as well. And that's the problem. That's the current problem. There's no idea. Let's have a cyber peace treaty or cyber non-proliferation treaty. Isn't happening right now because the benefits to their countries are so great on the offensive side that much as we want to do all this defensive stuff, there's been some stuff tried, but nothing's really worked. So it's not going anywhere. In fact, it's getting bigger every day. And nation state attacks against all sorts of things we see, against health systems, against power generating companies, you name it.
And there is talk about hackback and things like that. But that legislation creates a whole raft of other issues about legitimising going in and doing that kind of stuff.
That's interesting, yeah. So the Australian Signals Directorate, which is the military cyber capability, offensive cyber capability, they're looking at actually being used against not just nation states, but actually against criminal groups overseas, and even against people in Australia that are involved in various activities. So there's some the escalation of what's happening in cyber is just ever present. So which is concerning, but it's also means a lot of opportunities in government. There's a lot of roles in government for cyber. Obviously, the industries are supporting the government and defence sector obviously need cyber people as well. So it's good from as a cyber person, but obviously it's concerning as a citizen of the world. So.
Absolutely. And of course, as you mentioned before, with the prominence of Zoom calls now, people may be familiar with just some of the basic security issues that have popped up with Zoom calls and how I think there was Hamish and Andy, who are famous comedians, how they've been jumping into Zoom calls. Yeah. And they managed to even get into one with the Australian Navy, which really highlights some issues with security that we're seeing at various levels, even in governance. And so it's very interesting to also see how there is also that wonderful skill, or perhaps wonderful to some, to have that online security presence, but also intelligence. So perhaps if you're interested in any of those areas that Aaron and Stephen have mentioned, you could also consider a Master of Intelligence. And on that note, we do have an interest in double masters. So we have one particular question that's asking, what double masters in the security field do you believe are highest in demand or will make you the most employable?
I'm probably prejudiced, but I'd say the cybersecurity intelligence double masters, because I think the two work so closely together. And interesting, like we were talking to some recent graduates who'd gone for jobs, and these were intelligence graduates who'd gone for jobs at ASIO and places like that, and they basically said that the first questions are asked about their cybersecurity and cyber skills. So people that just want to be intelligence people, they're looking for those cyber skills out of the box in terms of employment. At the same time, as I sort of talked about earlier, I think that the synergy is so fantastic, because even if you don't actually want to work for an intelligence agency or in that space, that intelligence methodology is so important in the practice of cybersecurity. So I think they're a natural fit. The other one, which probably is worth mentioning, I mean, all the double degrees are good in terms of if the other areas, what you're interested in, because there's cyber aspects in each, but it's criminology. Because I think, the exercise of the criminal law is so much tied up with cyber now, in terms of, and any investigation that happens today in any sort of serious crime, there is a cyber element, a massive cyber element. We don't move around at all without this massive digital footprint we create. So So criminology, if you're interested in criminology and where crime's going and dealing with crime, I think that's a really great match as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that insight. It definitely, from what you've discussed earlier, there definitely does seem to be that beautiful pairing. But of course, with the field being so broad, it's great to have that opportunity with double masters to be able to kind of cross paths with what particular specialist interests you have. And of course, you will be more employable and of course still employable with such a huge demand that we have growing in the industry. Now we have a fantastic question that again more specifically targeted towards a course. So Stephen, this may be more in your domain, but asks, what are the practical elements of the course and how do those help develop employment skills? Of course, we've mentioned how our communication skills are developed through the course and with engaging in peers, but perhaps if there are any more practical experiences or ways to have some hands-on engagement, that would be great to have some insight into that. Thank you.
Sure. So we do in our cyber intelligence course, we do a lot of practical things, practical exercises. We actually use technical skills to gather information and put it together. Also in our cyber management course, which is around that CISSP, there's a lot of practical parts of that in terms of using various tools and understanding tools and building particular skills that are applicable. Obviously too, one of the things we do is we run a number of exercises and we do a lot of role plays around communicating information, around briefing the media, all sorts of really good practical experiences that are, I think, equip people far better in those sort of roles. Perhaps when I did my master's degree and my undergraduate degree, we really had not much opportunity to do any of that. We really encourage that opportunity to actually push yourself in terms of those skills. Certainly in terms of just assessments and academics, we tend to focus on case studies and analysing information, which is much more like what you do in a workplace than perhaps, just straight. I mean, obviously essays talking about the more theoretical, more broader issues, but also about very practical. Here's a case study, what happened, what can we learn from it, what could they have done better, that type of thing, which is much more like the sort of work analysis work that cybersecurity people do in industry.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. Well, I think that may unfortunately be the last of our questions that we have time to answer today. Thank you so much to everyone for engaging so much with our discussion. It's great to see that you have a range of technical questions and interests, and hopefully you'll be able to engage in those questions and a whole lot more when you study with us in the future. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you engaging. Thank you to our guests, Aaron Herpes and Stephen McCormick, for your wonderful engagement. I will just leave us with a little bit of information about how to get a hold of our one-on-one personal consultations. Please do know that if we didn't get to answer your question in our Q&A today, we will endeavour to respond to any of them via email. So thank you for still engaging. I'll just pop a slide up for you all to give you a little bit of information. So if you have any more questions or you'd just like to have a little more of an in-depth discussion about your future with Macquarie University, then you can book your one-on-one personal consultations with that link just there. You can type it into your browser. Excellent. Well, thank you so much everyone for joining me and for joining our guests today, and wishing you all the best in the future and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica.